This is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm thrilled to announce that we'll be releasing our 200th episode during the week of February 24th. A huge thank you to our amazing listeners, our Mavericks, for your continued support in making this journey possible. Coincidentally, this milestone falls during Intersolar in San Diego, making it a perfect opportunity to celebrate. We're excited to host a special party to mark the occasion, and even more importantly, will serve as a fundraiser to support those affected by the devastating fires in Los Angeles, something that has personally impacted many of my friends and colleagues. If you're interested in joining us, the event will take place on February 25th from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. in the Gaslamp District near the San Diego Convention Center. You can find the RSVP link in the podcast show notes. Let's get into it.
It's the discomfort where growth happens. When everything is there, all your needs are met, it doesn't allow you to figure out real problems and deal with them. And so it just goes back where growth happens. And I've been here, it was challenging. And whether it's Yuma or whether it's a new business that you don't fully understand and have all the answers for, sometimes people need to get pushed to that point where they're uncomfortable.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it.
Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited to have Adam. He's the Chief Executive Officer at We Recycle Solar. We're at their beautiful office and facility in Yuma, Arizona. And Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I think, everyone's been talking about obviously end of life and recycling, and what you're doing at We Recycle Solar is extremely innovative. Can you talk about We Recycle Solar and what you guys are focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We Recycle Solar is a life cycle management business or solution for the, as you mentioned, end of life. I know it's a little bit more morbid. I would like to think that we are injecting new life into new.
That's true. That's a good point.
I just realized again, our words are very intentional. They have to be very intentional. So, again, we started with a concept and we wanted to build North America's first market utility scale solar recycler. A lot of what we do here is not just recycling. It is first full circle solutions, resale, marketing of panels back into the market, finding a new home for them. And it is managing the process from cradle to grave, which we do have teams that go out to farms to decommission sites and really build a little more value for not only our customers, but reduce the number of recycling panels that are going into our process, because anywhere we can remarket and reuse panels is always a win. And it plays into what recycling is all about, which is reduce, reuse, and then recycle.
Yeah, definitely the 3 R's. And that's interesting, obviously, being part of the end of or beginning of life, and then obviously the recycling the panels, then the refurbishment. And it was amazing for me to have you, both you and Q, walk me through the whole process and to see the facilities in person. It's interesting because, how can I say it the right way? I was seeing so many different types of panels, bifacials, 500 watt panels. Like, I didn't expect, obviously, to see very new types of panels going for recycling. Can you tell our audience why maybe normally, obviously, the life of a panel, I would say, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, is maybe 25 to 35 years. But it was interesting to see that you have bifacials, which is obviously less, higher wattage panels than, say, that time period.
Yeah, we looked at this whole industry. We thought, like most, that there was going to be a 30-year life cycle for these assets. What we're finding is early upgrades, repowers, solar's never been more affordable than ever. Those were the contributing facts. And when you look at what, IRENA came out with, this report in 2016, they talked about these things being somewhat of a problem. But what we're seeing in the industry is the pace at which assets are getting decommissioned and retired for that end-of-life process. It's happening 50 times, I would think, faster than originally anticipated. And that's kind of the data that we're finding. Now, what you're referring to, that 500 watt panel, again, there's manufactured defects, manufactured second goods that are coming off lines. There's also early upgrades, and you're seeing a lot of folks having panels also on site that the breakage rates that are happening, they have overages that they purchase. And so those panels typically will end up somewhere in the life cycle portion of what we do. We thought initially we were going to see a lot less of the newer material, but surprisingly, we're seeing everything from 30-year-old panels to 6-month operational panels.
For sure. That's amazing to hear. How does the recycling process work? What are the key steps involved to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing to acknowledge is it's at the birthplace of that panel, aside from, manufacturing. Once it gets to the farm, it's a farm to table approach. There are opportunities that you can reduce the damage, the liability by properly decommissioning a site. Now, we train folks on how to do that, or we send our crews, and typically we've seen about a 30% reduction in breakage and damaged panels, and we bring those panels back, bring it to the facility here. They go through a mechanical process, frames are removed. They go through some of our IP proprietary process that goes through systems that separate all the materials. So glass, aluminum, silver, copper, all of that gets separated so that we can find a new home for those commodities.
Great to hear. What is like the current sort of processing capacity?
So interestingly enough, I think the industry standard is 1 panel per minute. And what we were able to do throughput is get 10 panels per minute. And that looks to be about 345,000 pounds a day, about 69 million pounds a year that we're able to process. Based on those numbers, if you think about it, even if we were talking about this facility, we would make up 25% of the lowest estimated national need for recycling. And that's just a drop in the bucket when you think about it.
Yeah, definitely. That is great to hear. And what are some of the most valuable materials recovered from the panels, and how are they reused?
So everyone was talking about copper and silver, that those are typically the most valuable, but it's not as much as people think, because some of the newer panels obviously are not. They don't have those high value commodities. Glass is going to be your biggest contributor to recycling as a whole. It's about 80% of the weight, and glass has value. We're finding now that the majority of glass that comes from overseas to processors here in the US, manufacturers, we can harvest that material right here and therefore bypass carbon footprint, bringing it over from other developing countries.
That's pretty amazing that it's not just the United States that you're doing recycling, that you're doing it in a lot of other countries. That was interesting to hear and see where these panels were coming from during the site visit. So that's pretty amazing. Yeah. And then can you talk about like what advancements in technology could make solar panel recycling even more efficient? I thought it was interesting to see the sort of fabrication of the custom machine that you created to recycle, which is a competitive differentiator and allowing you to do more processing capacity. But I'm sure there's a lot of other innovation.
Right. So, I mean, you're looking at throughput is going to be the biggest contributor to recycling really growing it as an industry. And that's something that we've worked on. But the world is moving so incredibly fast. You have AI, you have automation that's happening. Just from a simple example, with AI, you're able to evaluate the panels, the conditions, and get that information with an extreme amount of accuracy where the human eye can make mistakes. And so that is going to be the next phase.
Oh, that's amazing, because that will like obviously increase throughput, but also the materials, there'll be less mistakes, right? And that is really interesting. And then also you were mentioning robotics too, as well. Like, is that kind of related to the less obviously humans involved in the process? And then
so, yeah, I mean, right now we have some of that. We have different mechanisms, different machines that do pry the frames off of the materials so that we can separate the glass and have a cleaner finished product. But I do think that that's going to take it a step further with what's happening in robotics as a whole right now. We are going to see, you definitely do not need people lifting up panels.
for sure.
You'll be able to move it around. A robot will be able to do that work.
When do you think, is it pretty far off that's happening, or you don't?
I think in the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be scaled up to very similar to the automotive industry.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. And then can you talk about, I know we talked about this a little bit, but how does We Recycle differentiate from, I know there's other companies out there doing something similar. How do you guys differentiate from your competitors?
I think we started out with one thing. It was vertical integration. How do we build value at every turn? It's not just recycling. Where we're able to reduce the number of panels that are deemed for recycling is a farm to table model. So we're able to go to these sites, not only pack the materials, but also train folks on proper packaging procedures. And then we're able to really build certain mechanisms where they're getting value back. So the customer doesn't necessarily have a cost center, but now they're sharing in the value back in credits back for good material. And that's something that not all players in the space are focused on. They're very focused in on just the commodities and the recycling fees and collecting those fees. We like to think that we are partnered with that individual. How do we give back? How do we make it more affordable for them and accessible?
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. Coming up with kind of a partnership model. Like, who's your typical sort of client? Is the majority like asset owners or IPPs or?
Yeah, they're definitely the bigger, larger asset owner. So we're not Mr. and Mr. Smith down the street if they were to call and ask that we, take the 20 panels. That's not for us. Yeah, so they're utility, larger developers.
Yeah, definitely. And do you get involved early on, like say with the development of project, with the sort of end of life or beginning of life? Usually like now we're seeing obviously as part of RFPs, both public and private, it asks like, what's your plan decommissioning?
What's interesting about that is we're starting to see a trend. These folks are getting involved a lot earlier. We get involved in the decommissioning planning. That's an engineering report that we put out for.
Oh, interesting.
And it will evaluate the panels and really give them assessment of what they could see as a liability or a value back.
Yes.
And that seems to be helping them. But more and more people within the industry are coming up with a plan for, life cycle management and not just thinking about it at the 11th hour.
Oh, that's really important too, because I felt like earlier on, like when you would ask for a decommissioning plan, it was not really well thought out, but it's interesting to see because I'm seeing obviously developers taking it serious at EPCs and coming up with comprehensive decommissioning plans. And that's great that you're involved in that process because ultimately you're the expert at it. And it's about obviously building long-term relationships with your clients. And I know you work with very large asset owners in the space. So I'm sure, it's all about adding value where you can.
You have to.
Oh, for sure. And then is there any innovations? I know we talked about obviously robotics and AI that excite you the most.
So I can't deep dive too much. We're working on an IP right now that I think will really change how the business goes, not from just a recycling business. It's a critical material conversation. As this industry starts to unfold, you're going to see that the recycling industry, and as a whole, I like to speak on behalf of all of us that are in this industry, we're going to contribute to supply chain. We are going to change the way that supply chain happens in the US, which I'm very excited about. That speaks to me more than anything.
And that's huge to me that you're doing it here and you're in the US. You're an innovator. It's the first, right? Recycling facility. So, you're a trailblazer, Solar Maverick.
Solar Maverick is Adam. That's why we're aligned.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's amazing. I've been really impressed, obviously, with our conversations and then, being here at your facility. Can you talk about what role do you see AI or automation playing in the future of solar recycling?
I think it's going to make it more efficient. I think that you will get a more consistent feedstock from commodity that comes out at the end of the process. I think that there will be different mechanisms that will help push this industry along to standardize a lot of things. And as right now, it's kind of being cobbled together. It is a new industry. It is a new space, and it still needs that push. It needs that help, and it will get there because the tools are there.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you. And it's amazing, like how much innovation's happening. I'm sure within the time you started We Recycle, so there's been so much innovation that you've added to your business. It's just interesting to talk about like how you started and where you are and what you want to do. Can you talk about like when you started the company and then I guess what gave you the idea to do it? I mean, to me, like one of the things from the walking the facility was like, this is extremely complicated. It's not like you're just focused on recycling. You're focused on refurbishment. I mean, you've created your own IP and technology. You have other ideas of creating it. I mean, to me, it's like I was blown away and it's pretty impressive. Like, can you talk about?
Yeah, so in 2019, being in the Northeast, we realized there were a lot of rooftop solar systems, especially in New Jersey, right? Where you?
Yeah, where I'm from. Yeah, this is one of the first solar markets that had a very strong program incentive, and you have a lot of old. I think you started getting a lot of solar panels like 2005 to 2010.
And I noticed that. I noticed that in New Jersey market, there were a lot of 3PLs, a lot of warehousing that were utilizing this technology. So I said to myself, what's going to happen at the end of life, right? Where are we going with this? And so I think we were speaking to many people in the industry and there was no real solution. So I said to myself, this is hard. And I guess I'm just going to run into the pit of fire. And because I like things that are challenging, and let's try to figure this out.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, that goes to your background. Like the Solar Maverick podcast is about solar and entrepreneurship. Like, can you talk about how you really have an entrepreneurial background pretty much all your life in a lot of different things, and how it helped you get to where you are in different industries as well, right? And then also you have a recycling background, I think, with cell phones, right? And other.
So we had a de-waste company, ITAC company, that was focused on recycling of consumer electronics and reverse logistics. And that's what this is. You are ultimately looking to take back a product that's bulky, heavy, and problematic at times. And so the shift, or where, how we ended up here, is just many years of working in different industries and understanding that there's waste. How do you turn someone's trash into someone else's treasure? I've always been fascinated with those kind of businesses. And so it's easy to see businesses that are from a buy-sell model. Those are easy, low-hanging fruit. But to take something and try to innovate and to create a new market, that's what I was always excited about. That's what kind of energized me and allowed me to push forward. And through those other experiences, and the School of Hard Knocks, I realized that it's entrepreneurship and being in a place where you can create something. It changes you. It changes you in so many different ways, because failure is something that's right around the corner. It can happen at any instance, right? And at being an entrepreneur, it's like chewing glass and staring at the deep blue abyss.
And what do you think made you want to become an entrepreneur? It's just interesting to me as well. I know we talked about being from immigrant families who are entrepreneurs. Were your parents entrepreneurs, or were they?
We spoke about this with my dad's electrical engineer, right?
Oh, yes.
Being from the Far East, you find that you're either an engineer, you're a lawyer, or a doctor, right?
Yeah.
So these folks always had to pick a box. I think it was always intriguing to me. I noticed the people that made the biggest impact were entrepreneurs, and I wanted to make a big impact. And I said early on that I wanted to be part of that circle. So, but yeah, coming from an immigrant family, you're not always encouraged to do those things, right?
Your parents always want you to have a stable, high-paying job.
As an immigrant, because I think often their lives were not stable.
Oh, for sure.
There was change. There was a constant evolution of change and chaos. And so they figured that if you do your studies and you go to university and you get a degree, that built stability.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's interesting. You would think that there would be more of a risk tolerance, just leaving your home country to come to a new country, that they would be more amenable about taking risks. But that's interesting.
Imagine though, right? So we talked about this before, right? Think about your parents coming here in the 70s, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
How difficult it was for them.
Oh, yeah. I can't even imagine.
70s, and that's New York. They came to New York City and the Bronx.
Yeah, in the Bronx.
You mentioned the Bronx, right?
Yes.
They came to the Bronx. For those that don't know, the Bronx is an insane place now, but imagine in the 70s. I mean, it was a crazy place.
Oh, yeah. I can't even imagine.
What were they going through?
I have no idea. Just to be able to survive and to make enough money to provide for their family. And it's just pretty amazing what I think about.
And they had to assimilate, right? And
They had to assimilate.
trip to a new culture, this jungle, right? Concrete jungle. The Bronx is not for the faint-hearted.
No, definitely not. I mean, it's amazing to hear your story. And it's interesting because I feel like you have a unique perspective on the solar industry. What trends are you seeing within the space?
I think what we're seeing is reuse is something that is going to change the way people move, the way they work, the way they build communities. And that is a byproduct of the recycling industry in the US. You're going to have a lot of panels being deployed now to places in Africa, Asia, places that normally wouldn't have access to new panels. We have a donation model right now. We're working with places like India. We are setting up these community solar projects. The Bill Gates Foundation is taking the lead on. They're taking some of these assets that may not have 100% full efficiency, but they're able to utilize it for pennies on the dollar, and as labor is cheaper there, and harness the power of the sun You're changing lives, you're changing the way that where people live. And I think that is going to be the huge trend moving forward. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a huge impact in the secondary market.
To me, like, if you think about it, like, obviously, there's a huge secondary market opportunity. I'm sure there's just so much potential all across the world that they don't have panels that the secondary market could provide, which is great to hear. And it seems like an unlimited opportunity going forward.
Yeah, I mean, and the U.S. is going to help in those efforts.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for obviously doing this with the Bill Gates Foundation and other ways of donating panels to certain, groups. It's interesting. During the pre-interview, we talked about urban mining. Can you talk about what urban mining is? Like, I'd never heard it until you mentioned it on Nico's podcast, that concept. And I think it's really interesting concept that I learned a lot about.
When you look at the conversation around how mining happens and you're going in, you're disrupting different parts of the environment to extract critical and valuable commodities. What's wild is you can take an asset, a distressed asset, in this case, solar panels, and you can pull glass, you can pull aluminum. These are things that are desperately needed in this economy. And then when you look at logistics and how it works, containers coming over from, Southeast Asia all the way to the US, how inefficient is that? You can extract that material right here. No brainer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think as the technology becomes more commonplace, right, you'll see it instead of it being shipped, right, in containers.
Right.
I mean, that's probably the next phase, right, of We Recycle Solar 5.0.
I mean, I always say to people, I say, one of the things that, excites me is the fact that you have an opportunity for onshoring new industries, new businesses, fueling the feedstock of what they need to get off the ground. I spoke to a sandblast company and they had mentioned to me that they were getting their products from overseas. What's interesting about that is think about all of the resources that are needed to get that. And at any turn, just like COVID taught us, someone could hold that up. And those are tariffs, those are supply chain breaks in the whole system. And so right now it's independence. I mean, you're giving that to people in different industries.
Obviously, energy independence is through, solar as obviously a great component for energy independence. And then obviously you're doing recycling here in the US, which is obviously pretty impressive just because, we need more onshoring here in the US, as you saw during COVID, obviously. Then more onshoring, manufacturing has to be done here. So that's exciting to hear and keep up the great work. I can't imagine the complexity. I'm still after the site visit, I'm still kind of thinking about how complicated this whole process is. How are you able to simplify such a complicated process and different sorts of business models within, but they're related?
I think it's funny. So I was told early on with this vertical integration that I had one of the most complex businesses that other entrepreneurs, when they walked into the space, experienced. And they were like, well, why don't you simplify it? I was like, no, because I like insanity. I want to make it as difficult as possible. I think everything has its own place.
Yeah.
You have different silos. In those silos, when you look at the ability to reduce waste, reduce energy consumption, and go into resale, it's always a win-win. The other side of it is looking at companies here locally that are taking material for sandblast mix.
Yes.
What would have normally happened? Want to get into that business? No, but we were kind of forced that hand.
For sure.
But we're excited because it also continues to add value, and we're just going to value-based company.
Well, that's the thing. You're adding a lot of value, right, to a new part of the industry, right, that there is a huge need for, right? So I'm excited for you because this is just the beginning of a huge transformation and growth, right, for what you're doing and what we need in the industry. And that's one of the biggest criticisms here from, different people. Oh, well, you can't recycle the panels.
You can. And there's a great opportunity right now to, check off a lot of boxes. One of them is keep going back to supply chain. You're affecting supply chain.
For sure. And obviously this goes into some of the things that we talked about. Like, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs in the renewable energy, clean energy industry? We have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this podcast. You yourself are a Solar Maverick and, are creating innovation that will help the 3 R's, as you mentioned: reduce, reuse, recycle.
I would probably go into turn the doorknob.
By the way, I had issues with the doorknob today using your bathroom. The first bathroom was clearly someone was in it, and then I knocked. See, and then I went to the other.
So most people won't get this, right? Yeah, but why I want to talk about turn the doorknob, because that's how you and I met.
Yes.
And it's an interesting story. because we're both at a EDP event,
New York City Climate Week. Yeah.
Climate Week, right? So we're standing there and we're standing at the bathroom. 15 minutes goes by, right?
Yes.
15 minutes goes by and there's a junior analyst that comes in and he goes, "Hey guys, why did you go in?" "Well, it says that it's occupied."
Occupied, yeah.
I think he just went up and he just turned
He said, like, basically, if it's occupied and you've been here for 15 minutes, there's probably someone not in there. And then he basically just turned the knob.
Turned their knob. And he went in and went, "There's nobody in there." And it's funny, it's how we met. And I think the beauty of it is we connected over that experience and we're just laughing at ourselves. Like, our two captains of industry, we're leaders. And sometimes, we get stuck in our limiting beliefs.
For sure. And we all, I think, get stuck by limiting. It's not just us. And one of the things that I'm trying to push through is my own limiting beliefs. I think we're more critical of ourselves. And, I think everyone probably, even the greats, could push themselves even more, but it's due to beliefs, right? And whether you're able to push through those beliefs. I think, too, people are scared, right? And not competent. It's interesting but the byproduct of that is we got to actually talk.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, wow, it was pretty interesting.
I was blown away. My thing is, okay, hold on a second. So this guy is a developer, he's a consultant, he's in the restaurateur, he's got all these different other businesses. How do you do all that? You know what I mean? And to have that conversation and learn, and we had a follow-up conversation. It was a situation that needed to happen. Both got uncomfortable, and here someone taught us a lesson.
Oh, for sure. We both were joking about it afterwards, how we learned a lesson from that. And it's just interesting. Also, too, you never know who you're going to meet, right?
Right.
So we didn't know who we were, right? We just started talking, and then, we had a great conversation. You never know. Now I'm here
In Yuma, Arizona.
in Yuma. My first time, by the way. It's pretty amazing. Actually, I was surprised how quick of a drive it was from San Diego. And it was impressive to see the facility. And I'm curious to see the facility a few years from now with all the exciting plans that you have. Is there anything else that we should know about Recycle Solar that we haven't spoken about?
I think we covered a lot. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff that's coming out in the next few months and year. And we're here and we're trying to change the way that solar panels are disposed of and managed. And so we thank you for your support and all the others in the solar industry for bringing this to the surface and promoting recycling.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very important, thing to do in the industry. And we need people who are visionaries, who are willing to do something, create innovation and solving complicated problems, which you are. By the way, I know I told you this before, but I'm really enjoying the content that you put on social media. But I think what I really like is thought leadership. And so keep up, I think a lot of the industry is about education. And I'm sure recycling is not just an education to, the layman, but it's actually an education within the industry. This is still very new. And you're one of the first companies really in this space. You saw that opportunity when you were in New Jersey. So I'm sure a large part of what you do is education. I mean, think about it. You were walking me through the facility and the process, had no idea what's involved until, obviously I looked at the website and videos, but I think it's different when you're actually here at the facility. So I appreciate you inviting.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, anytime. And then where can our listeners learn more about We Recycle Solar if they want to learn more about you as well?
Sure. Obviously LinkedIn or werecyclesolar.com. They get more information there.
Great. Adam, this has been a great interview. I look forward to more conversation in the future, maybe your own podcast one day.
Let's do it. We just have to turn the knob. Remember, turn the knob.
Larry Fitzgerald from the Cardinals or former Cardinals. So that would be an amazing interview. One thing too, I would say is obviously you're from New York originally. You decided to have the business in, Yuma, Arizona. Can you talk about what led to that process? I know we briefly talked about this. And it's obviously you were talking about you're at some meeting with other business owners or some networking event and making introductions. Can you talk about maybe coming into a new environment and adjusting to that and then just that whole process? I don't know. It was interesting to me to hear it while we're walking, but to get more.
Yeah, ultimately, this was going back 2019 and wanting to do what would be a pilot scale and the research and development to get to this point. And it was in Dewey, Arizona. And then once we planned on building a full-scale facility, we were priced out of Phoenix. And one of the things that we found was the COVID effect and all the e-commerce that was happening was driving the prices up in Phoenix. And then we had an engineer that was driving through to San Diego and he said, there's a place called Yuma, Arizona. And he FaceTimed me. I said, just take it. It's cheap. You know, my wife and I have now moved here and it's been an adjustment. But there's something to say about a small town. I've had more support here than I ever had in New York.
Oh, it pulls its price by.
They're willing to help and they're constantly looking to elevate me and the business. And I think that I'm extremely grateful for that. And it's one of those things where sometimes, you know, it'll surprise you. Life is funny, works in mysterious ways and puts you in positions. And sometimes you need to get uncomfortable to get comfortable.
For sure.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? That's actually a great thing. I think a lot of people get comfortable and then they don't move out of their comfort zone. Can you talk about like how you've been able to be uncomfortable? Not just in obviously moving to, you know, Arizona or setting up the business here, but even, you know, during different ventures and different industries.
So early on, I was a very introverted child. I think that there was a point in time where I realized that the people in life that are making things happen, they're asking for it.
Yeah.
They're not waiting for someone to give it to them. And that ultimately got me to this point, but it's the discomfort where growth happens. All your needs are met, right? There was a takeaway that I was reading something, and I think the Prince of the Everett's had said, I drive a Bugatti or whatever the car was, and my son will probably drive something greater than that. My father was on a camel. And they said, well, what about your son's son, the future generation? He's like, oh, probably back to a camel.
Yeah.
Because of that hard nature, right? When everything is there, all your needs are met, it doesn't allow you to figure out real problems and deal with them. And so it just goes back where growth happens. And I've been here, it was challenging. And whether it's Yuma or whether it's a new business that you don't fully understand and have all the answers for, sometimes people need to get pushed to that point where they're uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah. And every business, as you know, you don't know everything. It's all, you know, taking actions, then learning from those experiences, both positive and negative, and then moving forward and continuing to be uncomfortable. Every day, honestly, I'm uncomfortable. People think I'm comfortable, but
You look very comfortable. You seem like a very, comfortable person.
yeah, but at the same time, there's so many ways that I'm actually uncomfortable, like pushing myself to do stuff or get involved in things that, you know, but people don't realize that I've just gotten used to being uncomfortable. But in the beginning, it was challenging.
Just remember, your parents came here.
Yeah, that's true.
With no support system.
Yeah, if they could do that, then what I'm doing is actually pretty easy. It's all relative, right? It's the same. Everyone says, this is what I like. Everyone, especially in New York City, says they're busy. But it's really what your priorities are. There's someone working 9 to 5. They only work 3 or 4 hours a day. There's other people working 12. But if you ask them, they'll be like, I'm really busy.
Exactly.
So it's all perspective. That's what the whole point. But this has been an amazing interview, Adam. I appreciate you making the time, and I look forward to having you on the podcast in the near future.
I'm very excited. Thank you for coming. You're a scholar and a gentleman.
You are as well, and I look forward to getting to know you even more going forward. And, you know, hopefully next time you're in New York, happy to take you to my restaurants.
I want to see the whole portfolio.
Oh, I could show you the whole portfolio.
And I'm going to go to your parents and say, you should be proud of him. You're being a little extra demanding.
Yeah. Well, you know how it is. And
He's made it easy.
well, thank you again, Adam. This has been an amazing podcast. Remember, everyone, to check out We Recycle Solar's website. They have a lot of great content on their LinkedIn as well. Adam's providing a lot of thought leadership, so definitely check it out. We'll also have it on the notes of the podcast as well. And yeah, thank you for your time again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Reneu Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@reneuenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.